And then starting off disc 2, we have ACEDIA. This track starts out with a decent piano melody. There's nothing too special about it, but it's not bad. It's just kind of piano. And that goes on for like a minute or so, a minute or two. And then there's a very awkward transition into a 4-on-the-floor beat that then progresses further. But I say it's awkward because it's just like there's a piano and then there's just this whole other section that just happens then after it. And this just doesn't feel like they're connected in any way. But yeah, so the 4-on-the-floor beat then continues and there's some like industrial type sounds and effects and stuff that get added to it and more percussion and stuff. Just turn it into kind of like a techno track. There's also some pretty interesting like robotic kind of sounds, like a that was a horrible imitation, but you get the idea. There's that kind of comes in and complements the beats. And there are some cool sounds here and there, but overall it just kind of repeats the same phrase over and over again, the same sounds over and over again, and it ends up feeling like just a bit of a less cool, less interesting version of Tears in My Head. And as I said, the piano really just feels kind of like arbitrarily thrown in there. It doesn't feel like it fits with the track at all. It feels like two very separate sections, even more than Gula. It feels very segmented, and I really don't know why the piano's even there in the first place. It doesn't really do anything to the track to help it or anything. So I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. Next up we have INVIDIA. This is just a straight up piano track. It's about 3 minutes. It's very like bass heavy. There's some very low notes on the piano that play. It feels like a little bit, at least at first, it feels very like overpowering bass-wise. It's a very minimal piano track. There's really not much going on. It's pretty repetitive, and to be honest, it doesn't really do much for me. It's not like bad or anything. It's just pretty uninteresting, and it's like it's just piano, so there's not much going on there, and the melody is like not good enough to really justify that much and make it good. So I don't know, I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 10. And next we have Errors in My Bread, which is like an alternate version of Tears in My Head. And it starts out with some of the same sort of sounds that Tears in My Head has. Although the thing I noticed for this one, it has a little bit of a more interesting beat, but less sort of textural, atmospheric sounds throughout it. Towards the middle, it breaks down into a pretty short little piano thing. It's a different piano thing than the one in Tears in My Head, but similar like formula, I guess, for that. And actually, the background like little poppy, scratchy synth thing, I don't know what you want to call it, that is present in both tracks, turns into more of like a almost distorted like electric guitar sounding thing in this one, which makes it sound a lot more intense. And especially in the second section of the song, and like the second half after the piano is over, you actually get some melody coming in there with like these synth notes that are just very like intense. They kind of sound like an electric guitar. I'm not sure if they are or not, but they come in and just play this pretty cool intense melody that makes the second section feel pretty epic and awesome, and definitely kind of makes the track for me. The last few minutes are much better than the first few, but yeah, it's fine, it's decent, and it does get pretty cool at the end, so I guess I'll give it an 8 out of 10. And then next up we have another remix by deadmau5 of a 9 Inch Nails song, Survivalism. I listened to the original of this track, and it's okay, but I think deadmau5 does improve it a little bit in that he just kind of spaces out the electric guitar segments a little bit better, I think, and it makes the vocals stand out a little bit more and feel a bit less like washed away, I guess. And he also makes the beat better. The beat is definitely improved a little bit in the deadmau5 remix, but that's kind of all he does. He doesn't really add too many sounds, he just kind of changes what's there, and there's nothing really characteristic of him in this. It's just kind of like a slightly different version of the original, which is fine. The original is decent, and this remix is also decent, but there's nothing super special about it. It's not like really catchy. It's just kind of this. I mean, the thing is, it starts off like the beginning and the end, and some middle segment also. They have these really quiet parts where it's just like the beats and the kind of like the lyrics are kind of like whispered, almost, and then it kind of abruptly transitions into this loud like electric guitar like kind of thing. And I don't really like those transitions too much. It feels like it's going from chill to like really intense, kind of abruptly. And the whatever melody this track has is pretty washed away, since most of the lyrics are like half sung, half screamed. And that's fine, you know, that's a style of music. I'm maybe not a huge fan of that particular kind of singing, but there's nothing really wrong with it either. I don't know, this track just isn't super interesting to me, and I don't think deadmau5 did enough with it to make it really like something I'd listen to if I like had the choice. So I don't know, it's not horrible, but I think I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. Next is Silent Picture. This track has a monotone synth line that sounds sort of interesting going on throughout the whole thing basically, and it has these like acoustic guitar chords that play also throughout pretty much the whole thing. That's kind of all though. You get like a little bit of bass coming in, but it's very in the background. You don't really hear it too much. And you get a little bit of piano near the end, but it's overall a pretty minimalist track. There's not too much going on, and it's pretty short. It's a nice chill track, I guess, but it's kind of boring, and there's not too much that happens during it to make it super interesting. And it's not really like catchy or anything, so I don't know, I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10, I think. Next we have RLYEHS Lament. RLYEH being a reference to the H.P. Lovecraft novels. It's the place where Cthulhu sleeps or whatever. I like H.P. Lovecraft, it's pretty cool. Anyway, this track is pretty cool. It's pretty like down-tempo, IDM, that type of thing. It starts off with a lot of these kind of glitchy, interesting sound effects that just add a lot of like texture and stuff to I'm saying texture a lot, I'm sorry, but I don't know how else to describe these little like not really so much musical but just kind of like sound effects that just add texture to the song. I don't know how else to say it. But yeah, it starts off with a bunch of those sound effects and a kind of nice melody that's just in this sort of light synth line that also sounds pretty interesting. And that kind of continues, and the melody's, I said, decent, but it's nothing super special. And then it's just kind of this nice relaxing thing. And then you get the beat section that comes in a bit later. And the beats are a little bit like abrasive, they're a little bit too loud, I feel like. They're just kind of like, they're kind of like very, I don't know, they're kind of rough, I guess, for what's up to this point been a pretty like chilled out track. But they do sound pretty cool and they're pretty interesting, so I don't have too much of a complaint there. I will say once even more beats come in though, the melody kind of fades out a little bit too quickly, I think. There's like a minute or so at the end that's just beats, and the melody just kind of cuts out completely. I think a little bit too early, but it's not a huge deal. Yeah, this song's pretty good, nothing too much to complain about. It's pretty interesting. I'd give it an 8 out of 10. Next is Superbia, another all-piano track, but this one I am a much bigger fan of the melody of than INVIDIA. It's very pretty. It's a very nice melody. It sounds really good. It's a little bit repetitive and it kind of just repeats the same thing over and over, but it's only like 2 minutes or so, 2.5 minutes, so I think the fact that it's not super long kind of makes up for that and makes the repetitiveness not super annoying. And yeah, I mean, as just a short little piano track, it's pretty great. But as I said, it is just piano. It's a little bit repetitive, it's not super interesting, but the melody's good, so yeah, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Next we have Mercedes. This track is very similar to Infraturbo Pig Kart Racer in that it has some like car racing sounds, and it also just has this sort of generic kind of like arpeggiated synth pattern, and it's just kind of like a progressive house track that builds on this continuous synth melody that's arpeggiated, I guess, and just kind of coupled with the beat just goes throughout the whole thing, and it's around 9.5 minutes. I will say though, this track is much more boring than for Turbo Pig Kart Racer. It just doesn't have much going on. The melody just stays the same throughout the whole thing pretty much, and there's not too much else that's added to it. The only interesting thing about this track is there's a couple samples like near the beginning and sort of near the middle or end that sound, they're very non-musical. They sound like they're sort of like you're in an airport or something, and there's like the announcement speaker thing that's telling people where to go or whatever. It kind of sounds like that, but I'm not sure what it actually is. And there's another one that's like sounds like someone going into a car and driving away. But they're very quiet in the background. I didn't even know they were there for the first few listens of this song. But listening to it more closely, I can tell that, which makes it a little bit more interesting, but it also feels just kind of like randomly thrown in there, and it doesn't really add to the track much. And you know, at the end of the day, it's still just a kind of generic progressive house track that repeats the same melody for 9.5 minutes, and it's just not that interesting in my opinion. I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. Then next we have Bleed. This is my favorite track in the album. It doesn't seem to be too many people's favorites, which is a little surprising, but I guess not. So basically what this track is it starts off with these kind of bass chords that come in pretty slowly and just fade in. And the bass chords are very kind of noisy, but like in a good way. Like the noise and just like the grit to the bass, just the sweeping bass notes of this track, I think just really make the track sound more full and warm. And then you get some like kind of strings notes coming in there just to add to this ambient kind of like soundscape thing that's being formed here. And you get this other synth that plays this super beautiful melody. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's like 4 notes and then 4 sort of similar notes, and that just kind of repeats. But it's really effective, and it works super well with the lush, warm synth notes that are in the track. And then on top of that, you have the melody going, and it's just beautiful, man. Like, the track makes you feel really like sad and happy at the same time. It's a very emotional track, definitely the most emotional on this album. And it doesn't even really have any beats or anything, which is pretty new for deadmau5. It does have this sort of thing at the end where, if you know anything about music production, you'll know like sidechain compression is something that musicians use, or like EDM people use a lot of time to, like, if you have beats, every time the beat hits, the rest of the track kind of ducks down in volume a little bit, and it feels like it's being sidechained to sort of like invisible beats, or like or at least like a really quiet kick drum near the end, and that just kind of like fades. The like sidechain just kind of fades in, so it goes like instead of just. It's hard to explain, man, but anyway, you get the idea. I don't know how I feel about that effect. It's kind of cool, but I don't know, I feel like it breaks up the beauty like a little bit, but it's interesting, and there's nothing really wrong with it, so I'm fine with that. But yeah, this track is just super nice, super melodic, and I hope he does more stuff like this. It's really nice. I will say though, there was another version of this track that I think was a little bit better even. It was like a minute and a half more, and it had a little bit more kind of like percussive sounds at the end, and I feel like the melody was a little more present or something. I don't know. This album is apparently just about him releasing worse versions of stuff he's already made for some reason, but it's still really good, and I'd feel bad giving it anything less than a 10 out of 10. And then next we have Ira, yet another piano track as sort of like an interlude between 2 other tracks. This track's pretty cool. It has this like kind of not too loud, just barely present like droning synth line that kind of just happens throughout on top of the piano, but it's still definitely focused on the piano. But it makes it a little bit more interesting that it has this kind of like drone synth on top of it. And the melody's fine, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not quite as good as Superbia, but it's still really good. The melody is like a little bit of a darker version of Superbia, kind of, and the synth really adds to everything and just makes it sound good. I don't really have a problem with this one, so I'm going to give it another 7 out of 10, like Superbia. Next up we have Monday. This is a very interesting track. It has these acoustic guitar chords that come in the beginning, and then you get like a piano that also comes in on top of that, playing some chords. So it starts off very like acoustic sounding, and then a pretty decent beat comes in, nothing super special, but it's not bad. And then you get this kind of sort of airy sounding synth line that just plays this melody. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty like lighthearted, pretty nice. And then you get these super interesting robotic sounding vocals that I'm pretty sure are from Joel himself, deadmau5. I'm not positive, but if it is him, it's super processed, so it just sounds like a robot at this point. And it's real glitchy and stuff. You can barely even understand what he's saying, but it's really cool. And then the vocals just follow the same melodic pattern as the synth before it, and it's very interesting, very cool, and decently catchy. Just a very creative track in general. It's actually a little bit too short. I think it should have been extended a little bit, but yeah, it's pretty cool. I think I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Next we have A Moment to Myself. I really like this track. It starts out with these sort of ambient sounding synth pads, the synth chords or whatever, that then build up, and you get all these other like textural sounds that get added on that sound really cool. There's all these like and there's all these like very spacey sound effects that make it just sound like this awesome soundscape thing, and that just keeps building up, and you get a piano that comes in, and eventually you get a beat that's just like gets layered on as it goes, that just adds to the intensity, and this track just builds up to be this pretty beautiful, pretty intense thing. I don't know, it's pretty nice. I really like it. I feel like it had a little bit more potential, that he could have made it even better, and it might have actually like rivaled Bleed as my favorite of this album. But as of right now, it's a little bit short. It feels like it's cut off, kind of like it builds up and builds up and then just sort of like drops to nothing. And I don't know, I feel like it could have been a little bit more emotional and intense than it is, but it's still pretty great as it is, and I don't really have much of a complaint, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10. And then we have Pets. This track is very similar to Mercedes in a way, in that it has this sort of arpeggiated melody, and it's just kind of like the structure of it similar, just a progressive house track. The difference is being that it doesn't have those like non-musical sound samples added in, and also the melody is way better. It's just very relaxing, very peaceful, very pleasant to listen to, very calming. It also gets these cool like vocal samples of like a female voice singing like one kind of note, just like ah, and then that keeps repeating over and over again, and that just really adds to the mood of the track, which is just very peaceful, playful, nice, relaxing, and pretty emotional melody. It's a great track. I mean, it is, you know, typical kind of progressive house format. It's not doing anything super unique with specific sounds or how it's laid out or anything, but just melody-wise, it's great, and it's a fantastic example of a progressive house track. And yeah, it's definitely another highlight of the album. I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. And then we have Coelacanth 2, the successor to Coelacanth 1, I guess. It starts out with the same sort of, you know, note, coelacanth note, whatever. It just kind of is by itself for a while. It gets a little bit annoying, but whatever. It's basically like Coelacanth 1 with a slightly less present and maybe slightly darker melody, and then it also has a piano melody that goes on top of that. That makes it a little bit more interesting than Coelacanth 1, in my opinion. The synth melody is a little bit, as I said, it's more like repressed. There's not as much going on there. It's more like bassy synth notes, and then the piano is more what's focused on. But yeah, it works fine as a transitional track. Nothing super special, but the melody's decent. And yeah, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. And then finally, the last track on this double album is SEEYA, featuring COLLEEN, D'AGNOSTINO, something like that. Still can't do it. This is a very kind of funky, kind of bass guitar driven track. It's very just like groovy, danceable. There's a lot of industrial sounds that are present in this. And then, of course, there are vocals from COLLEEN that are pretty great. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not like super epic or anything, you know, the track isn't really supposed to be that. It's just kind of supposed to be a lighthearted, kind of dancey thing. And it works well with that. The vocals there's nothing wrong with them whatsoever. Then in the last couple minutes of the track, there's a sort of percussive sounding piano that comes in and just kind of complements the rest of like the bass line, the rest of the track. And then you also get these cool like kind of 8-bit sounding synth things like that happen towards the end, and a few other kind of synth things. The last 2 minutes of this track are much more interesting and like instrumental wise than the entire, you know, first 4 minutes or whatever. But I guess that's because the first 4 minutes are focused on the vocals and the last couple of minutes are focused on the instrumental. And yeah, the last 2 minutes are really cool and just show the deadmau5 side of things much better. Overall, the track isn't super catchy or super interesting in any way, but it's also a decent amount of both of those things. So yeah, I mean, it's fine. You know, there's nothing wrong with it, and the vocals are good. The last couple minutes, instrumental-wise, are good. I think I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Whew! That was a lot of tracks, but finally we can get into the album composition. How well did this album work together with all the tracks? How well did it all fit? Pretty well, I would say. This album definitely felt more like an album than anything he's done before, rather than just like a compilation of stuff he's worked on the past year or two. There were a lot of like little short interlude tracks that linked other tracks together pretty nicely. Sometimes the piano seemed a little bit forced on some tracks, like he just kind of threw it in there because he felt like he had to have piano because that's the vibe he was going for or whatever. But the piano sometimes just feels sort of out of place. And there's a lot of variety, but again, with that you have sort of these straight up progressive house EDM bangers along with stuff that's just like very ambient and IDM and just like glitchy and just very experimental and very different alongside of that, which would work pretty well if they're like spaced out a little bit better. Like if most of the EDM stuff is on the first disc and most of the other stuff on the second disc, but there's still some spilling in between them. It feels sort of arbitrary how those are placed in the track listing, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, overall, pretty good, but there are some problems with composition and stuff like that. I do like the idea of the album, but there are some things that are a little bit off about it, so I'm going to give this section, the album composition, an 8 out of 10. So, all of those scores averaged together, and what do you get? You get the final grade for the most recent deadmau5 album, While 1 is less than 2, to be a 6.9 out of 10. Kind of a lower grade than I was expecting, to be honest. It's actually the lowest since Vexillology. Vexillology is a lot lower, but it's still a bit lower than all the other ones, which was a little surprising to me when I calculated that, because I thought that this was like my second or third favorite album by him, but apparently not. It's kind of weird, because in my head, I don't think of this album as being worse than the majority of the other deadmau5 albums, like it may seem from the grade I gave it. So, I don't know, I might have to rethink my grading strategy, because the method I use is where the album as a whole, the grade for that, gets the same value as any individual song on the album. And I think if you just look at the individual tracks all by themselves on this album, it's not that good, and that's why the grade is a bit lower. But if you just look at the album as a whole, it's much more solid and cohesive than a lot of his other albums, which really do just feel like compilations. So I don't know, I might have to rethink my formula I use for grading these things, because this one didn't really reflect my views of the album. I actually think it's probably like my second or third favorite deadmau5 album, maybe even first, I don't know, something like that. So I don't know, but whatever, I'm just gonna keep it right now because it's all said and done. But in the future, for other album reviews that I will do, I'll probably just kind of use a different grading system. But yeah, that's the deadmau5 album review series. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you all for watching. I'll do his next album when it comes out, probably a few weeks after it releases, so I have time to listen to it sometime, like a few times. And so yeah, keep in touch with that. And also I'll be reviewing other electronic music albums. I'll probably do less like EDM stuff, more kind of experimental electronic stuff, because that's more what I'm interested in right now. But I'll start reviewing some newer albums, so you can hear opinions on an album that like just came out, stuff like that. And yeah, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed this series. I'm gonna keep making videos, and yeah, see ya.